we do not always know what's underneath, right? Because we haven't seen those deeper parts of self.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I still haven't accessed what's at the bottom of the well.
Yeah.
I did get the bucket out. I did like hook it up and like drop it
Yeah.
down in there, and I have pulled some water out, but there's
Yeah.
no way that I've gotten into the depths of the well of my own creative process.
Yeah. Welcome to Exploring the Edges. Let's get into it. Hi, welcome back to the podcast, Exploring the Edges. This week we're going to be talking about week 12 of The Artist's Way and tying it into our own lives and probably side questing at some point because we often do, but we're going to try and stay on task. And this is it. This is it for The Artist's Way. I don't know that we'll do another book. Maybe we'll talk about other things that we're reading, but for
Yeah.
now, yeah, for
Yeah,
now,
la
this is it.
last week of The Artist Way.
Yeah.
Final wrap up of week 12, and we are filming on location.
Yeah.
This week we are together,
Oh, it's
which
really
is really
nice.
nice because we have less connectivity issues, less internet issues.
Yeah.
We're able to drop in together, which felt really
Hmm.
nice. We have a lot of coherence. So,
Yeah.
yeah, hopefully it's an exciting episode.
Yeah.
Week 12.
Week 12.
This was really just a summary. I feel like a way to tie together all of the principles that we looked at over the artist way. And we'll talk about a couple of them and then we'll give an overall summary of our experience doing this
Yeah.
journey and do some, not like a review, but just,
Yeah, just a quickie review kind of. You
yeah,
can decide if you want to do it or not. It's going to be different for everybody, so
yeah.
in the end it doesn't really matter, but we'll talk about
It's
it.
true. And yeah, we will talk about that when
Yeah.
we get there. So chapter 12,
Hmm. Sabotaging, last minute sabotage.
last minute sabotage.
Yeah, which she did talk about, but as in all the chapters, she talked about it for a short period of time and then other stuff.
Mm.
The tasks were not super focused on the self-sabotage, the last minute sabotage, but interesting.
Yeah, and I think she started the chapter by really talking about like honoring the darkness.
Hmm.
And by that not the shadow, but the quiet, the quiet and sort of looking at, when we plant a seed that the roots could be really growing well and well established and we wouldn't see anything on the surface.
Yeah.
And so feeling like you can trust the mystery.
Hmm.
And I think that this is such an important message because a lot of times as we work towards our goals, like even I think a great example is, that day in August that you messaged me on Facebook,
Oh, yeah.
because we do sort of walk steadily towards something that we cannot see. And we do have to leave room for the mystery, for there to be just a message that shows up and changes your life forever, just one day out of the blue.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we do try to, we do want to be predictive.
Yeah, sure.
Like I think, like weather reports or astrology or, any of the tools that we use to try to predict what the future will be like, retirement plans.
Oh, everything. And it starts when you're young. I mean, you guys know if you've been listening along, but I'm in the teaching field. I supply teach. I sometimes take longer assignments, but you go into any classroom now, maybe not in grade 8, but anything for sure before grade 4, and it's on the board. Like at this time we're doing this, at this time we're doing this, at this time we're doing this.
Mm,
Sometimes I go in as a sub and I don't write it on the board. And I was in a grade 7 class and there was kids asking like, are you going to put the schedule on the board? Or what are you going to do today? Like, are you going to put the schedule? And I was like, okay, guys, it starts so young and it's
mm,
so ingrained. And I think especially now, like when we were kids, we sort of just like went outside and did stuff.
mm.
But I think now like there's like kids have schedules all the time. It feels like they go
Yeah.
to school and they have a schedule outside of school. Like now is dance class and then it's this and then it's this and then it's this and your whole day is kind of planned out.
Yeah.
And it's just like anything else translates to your whole life.
Yeah, and I do think that that is a view into the micro lens of what
Hmm.
that looks like. But at a macro level, I do think we have these ideas about what our life is supposed to look like.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think just in terms of sort of translating that to creativity. And I know we talked a little bit last week about like, you're not always going to be sitting in beautiful juice and abundant flow
Hmm.
of energy and creative energy. Like there are some, just natural cycles where we do sort of pop back into our deep inner stillness.
Hmm.
And I think a perfect example of this, Jen and I were talking about how we felt like in the middle of the artist way, we were
Yeah.
really pouring. Like there was an episode we recorded. I was like, I'm birthing 30 babies.
Yeah.
There were so many projects going, and feeling into Venus retrograde, I think is a really great
Hmm.
example of, and as we start to look at the transits of these big energetic influences of our personal planets, like, Venus representing love, creativity, abundance,
Hmm.
and sort of feeling into the pulling back of a retrograde, not a pulling back, but a deepening into the
Yeah.
the waiting. And so it's interesting to think about that in terms of your creative output.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just interesting to think about it, even in terms of the seasons,
Mm,
and we're in a society that just expects you to always be producing, always be creative, always be doing everything.
mm,
But nature doesn't even do that, and we are nature.
yeah,
And I think these periods of rest, like winter, stuff's not dead. It's
yeah,
just a deep period of rest.
yeah. And
We need
even
it too.
and even in spring,
Hmm.
if we can start to feel into like when the earth starts to, turn everything back into forward
Yeah.
momentum, and many of the processes around roots and germination and all of these subtle processes in the cycle, we don't really see, the bloom at that time.
Hmm.
And so I think this is what she talked about just in the beginning, trusting the darkness, trusting the
Yeah.
mystery. And it's so important because we don't always have that like direct, yes, you're on the right path. It's more of like a subtle knowing and being able to tune into those key indicators when you ask yourself, like, am I on the right path?
Yeah.
And sometimes we're going to talk a bit about these like wet blankets she talks about,
Yeah.
but sometimes the things, those key indicators in your internal process, am I on the right path? They are so subtle
Yeah.
and they are not observable and they're not transactional.
Hmm.
Like I couldn't say to you, like, Jen, here, look at my inner world, look at my inner compass.
Yeah.
See, I'm on the right path.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times there's not like a physical foundational,
Yeah.
there's no physical evidence, kind of.
Yeah. Sometimes it's even hard, like as yourself, to
Mm,
know if you're on the right path. And sometimes I think that we equate it with things going smoothly and things being feeling easy. And
mm.
that doesn't necessarily
Yeah, I mean,
mean
you're on
that
the
you're on the
right
right
path.
path,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's just comfort.
yeah. Yeah, and I think then she also sort of talks about escape velocity, she calls it.
Hmm.
And this is like the test, the
Yeah.
test. And this is talked about, I think, in a lot of spiritual circles, feeling like sometimes the hardest period is actually right before you make that big shift.
Yeah.
And I think we do sometimes, sometimes we talk about like, is spirit testing you? Are you being tested? Do you really want it?
Hmm.
Are you able to move through what's needed to be sacrificed? Are you able to move into the darkness for a long time?
Hmm.
And it's interesting, this language around being tested, because I think that there are two things happening. It feels like, as you get closer to the newness of birth,
Hmm.
everything looks unfamiliar.
Yeah.
And so I do think it's, in that respect, it's a test, but she sort of talks about it like, right before you're about to marry
Like the perfect
the
person.
perfect person for you, you get like a text from that ex that you just couldn't get away from
Yeah.
for a couple of years.
Yeah. And there's
Uh,
like a reason why you left them.
yeah, or even like, you have a really important business trip coming up and there's a big presentation you're gonna do. And then
Hmm.
like suddenly your kid is sick, and you
Hmm.
can't go. So it feels like this, yeah, test, the language of a test feels challenging for me, but
Hmm.
she's talking about like where we have these last minute opportunities to bail.
Yeah, and I think it can be big or small. Like I was, as you're talking about this, I was thinking about in the summer when I was doing some work. Mercury was in retrograde this summer. Mercury feels like it's always in
Yeah.
retrograde.
Yeah.
But there was a deep dive Mercury retrograde workshop that I had access to. And And I was like, okay, well, I'll just do it tomorrow when I'm like when I've had a better sleep because I'm really tired. And then I was trying to do laundry and the laundry wouldn't dry because Rafiki threw up on the couch at like 10:30 p.m. or something like that. I was ready to shut it down. So already going to bed later. So I put it in the laundry, wait an hour for it to be washed, put it in the dryer, go to bed. In the morning, it's not dry. Back in the dryer, it doesn't dry. Nothing is working. Then I run the dishwasher. I was house sitting at the time, and like all of this soap starts coming out of the dishwasher onto the floor. So I'm exhausted.
Nightmare.
Stuff keeps happening like constantly. And I just had this feeling. I was like, and this wasn't with this language or anything of this book
Mm,
because it was a long time ago, but I was like, okay, well, how badly do I want to do this? Because I feel like that's the question that's being asked.
mm,
Like, do you actually want to do this workshop? And the workshop was great.
mm,
It was super helpful and I got a good practice out of it. But it was just like, it's never going to be the perfect moment, and
mm.
I was just getting stuff thrown at me and thrown at me and thrown at me, and I had to choose, like, am I going to sit down and do this while I'm tired and there's soap all over the floor? I cleaned it up, but there's still more soap coming and I don't know where it's coming from anymore.
Mm,
But yeah, kind of felt like that even on a smaller scale, not even on like the big life stuff. Sometimes there's important things that you need to do that are like a next step,
yeah,
and maybe it's even gonna come up there.
yeah.
Yeah.
I can feel into it even in the context of our relationship,
Hmm.
you know? Like before you make these big decisions, like you said you wanted it. This
Yeah.
is what you asked for.
Yeah.
Here it is.
Yeah.
And I do think that there's always this like last minute, well, am I really gonna do it? You know?
Yeah.
Like even sometimes when we're offered like the things that we've really been calling in, that we've been praying for,
Yeah.
it sometimes even still feels challenging right before you take that step.
Yeah.
And so this is sort of what she's talking about in this last chapter, the summary chapter of the
Yeah.
artist way, because I can feel it, like there's been many times in my own creative process, like the very first time I made my Instagram account public,
Yeah.
the very first time I shared a channeled message,
Yeah.
the time I set up my website to offer energy services,
Yeah.
energy healing services, you feel that like, it's you have to take the step even.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be just like a subtle, like you say, it can be subtle, right?
Mm.
It's not, she's talking about you finally met the perfect
Your ex
person and
calls
like
you.
this toxic ex calls you, and you're
Yeah.
like, what am I gonna do?
Yeah.
So these are the examples that she's giving, but I'm even thinking like, well, they had the Mercury retrograde example, but I'm even thinking when I actually did post on the Facebook group that we are
Mm.
both in that has like 33,000 members,
Yeah.
and I wasn't going to post. And before that, um, I had had a meditation and I promised my heart that I was going to start listening to it again. And I was like, I promise I will start listening to you. And I had a moment where I wasn't going to post about my meditation experience, um and then I did because I had made this promise. But it wasn't really a test, but
And
it was
just,
just like, are you going to do it? You said that you were going to listen.
yeah.
Your heart is telling you that you should put this out there.
Yeah.
Your experience that was like a meditative, like shamanic journey into the underworld.
And just for context, that's the message that connected
Yeah,
us.
that's the one that Jack saw and she commented on it, and it wasn't like the moment, but it was, and it
Yeah.
was the one that I was hesitating to do.
Yeah.
So in a way, it wasn't like this big test where like something came into my life. It was just like,
Yeah.
I'm not like I never post this kind of stuff online.
Yeah.
And then my heart was saying, do it, do it, do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it could be anything. It could be anything.
Yeah. And I do think that she does spend a little bit of time talking about these like sabotage patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And like I feel like I still have areas of myself that I'm sabotaging myself. There are pieces of my
Yeah.
identity, parts of my creativity, parts of my, you know, sexual energy and process that I'm still working through shame around.
Yeah.
And so I do think that we do know where we're sabotaging ourselves, and whether that's related to creativity or whether we know that we're undervaluing ourselves and it's keeping us out of these really fulfilling relationships,
Hmm.
if we know we should be asking for a promotion, or
Yeah.
we know we should be finding a better job that values us more, we
Or
know we're
we
being
know we should be going
underpaid.
for a walk, like it's simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we are, and I do think that we can look at this, as soon as we call it sabotage,
Hmm.
I think that that does bring an extra layer of accountability,
Yeah.
because it's not procrastination, it's not laziness, it's sabotage,
Yeah.
and we're doing it to ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's some good language in this chapter around that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing that she talks about in this chapter, and she calls them wet blankets,
Oh yeah.
are like the people that you're going to share your dream with, and they're the what if people.
Yeah.
They're where's the money coming from?
Yeah.
But you just met her online. You don't
Yeah.
really, yeah,
Yeah.
you haven't really sorted this out all the way.
Yeah, that's a tough one too. And sometimes, and I think often, they're the people that you feel like you're closest to, which makes it extra challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it is a good way, because I do think it's important to have people who bring some grounded reality in.
Sure.
But it's
Yeah.
also really important to have hype people. And they're the people
Yeah.
that like are going to get excited, Like if you're working on something, they're the people that are going to be like, amazing. I can't wait to hear
Yeah.
your voice. Or you're like, oh, I just started this creative painting class. You're like, incredible. I can't wait to see what you come up with.
Yeah.
Like you're so unique and I can't wait to see how it's expressed.
Yeah.
And these are the people that you want to have around you.
Sure. And like people with no attachment to outcome because it's not even their outcome.
Right.
And it feels like you can have this type of person or you could have the type of person that's like, well, the last time you signed up for a class, you didn't even finish it because you didn't like it. Why are you signing up for a painting class? Like it's just a waste of your money.
Yeah.
And that's not helpful
Totally
because
different
yeah,
energy.
maybe painting is like it's it.
Yeah.
Maybe you didn't like pottery or maybe you didn't like
Or maybe the time
glass
that,
blowing.
yeah, maybe the time that you did painting before in your life, you weren't ready to like really uncover this. Because I do think that as cliche as it is, every single time you share yourself could be the time that it's received,
Hmm.
and this is the truth.
Yeah.
You could we look all the time at these artists who painted their entire lives, these classical painters, and they weren't at all received until they were dead,
Yeah.
or they weren't at all received until they were
Sure.
in their 60s, or
Yeah.
I can feel right now there's energy in the field.
Mm.
It does feel like right now, as we're speaking into this idea that any time could be the time,
Hmm.
there's so much support around that. And maybe it's ancestors. I don't know. I just felt everything come into the
Yeah.
room right now when we started talking about that. But if you can't have that spark, that hope,
Yeah.
it's what calls you forward. And
Yeah.
so as soon as you have this group of people around you that you've identified, and it doesn't matter who it is, it could be your mother.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who it is.
Yeah.
As soon as you know that there's somebody that's going to say, ah, that's a waste of money. You don't even like painting. You have to put them in this, she calls them wet blankets, but
Yeah.
basically like they're going to snuff out your fire.
Well, and that's the thing. And sometimes you don't have a big fire that can handle a blanket on it. Sometimes it's just a little spark and you need somebody to be like, yeah, great idea. I
Yeah.
love this for you.
Yeah.
You know?
And she does at the end of the chapter talk about this like circle, starting an artist circle, a
Hmm.
sacred circle, and the intention of that circle, and whether you have it publicly or whether you focus on it in your community or just your friend group,
Hmm.
it's the people who will fan the flames.
Sure.
Like, and she talks about how vulnerable the seeds are when they're first being planted. And this has been a reoccurring story in my own spiritual development. Some of the guidance that I receive when I dive in is that it's so small and fragile right now. And so you have to really put all of your attention on growing it and nurturing it and keeping it safe. And
Hmm.
oftentimes, I think what we're doing is we're wanting to like share our excitement or seek recognition, like, ah, look at this. What do you think?
Yeah.
And it could be so harmful because you don't, unless you know that you're in the
Yeah.
fire circle,
Yeah.
like it can be really challenging. And so I do think she talks about how important it is to put this protective circle around your
Yeah.
desires.
And I think that's hard because then you end up like hurting feelings.
Mm,
Like how long was this a secret? Why didn't you tell me? Well, I
hmm.
had to make sure that when I told you and you threw a blanket on it, the flame was big enough to sustain it,
Yeah.
and that's hard too. I don't
Yeah.
know, it's a really hard thing to navigate.
Yeah.
But I did think it was interesting when she was talking about the artist circle in this chapter because before we read the chapter, we had just done like a 3-day course on like holding a circle, like a women's circle.
Yeah,
Yeah,
facilitating.
facilitating. So, yeah, it always lines up in some way or another, you know, but
Yeah, but it is super important.
hmm
And I do think that sometimes, sometimes the people around us are projecting their own fears,
I think a lot of times they are.
hmm
Yeah, of course.
their own, life experience. And you and I have talked about this idea that, something that's carried us forward through our lives is this belief that something more is possible, that there's
Yeah.
something more out there. And it's interesting, I found some poetry that I had written as like a young teenager
Yeah.
recently. It's survived many purges,
Yeah.
and I did find it at home. And one of the things that I was writing even as a really young teenager was like, I know that this isn't it. I know
hmm
there's more out there. This can't be it.
hmm
And it's that refusal to settle for something that doesn't all the way light your heart on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget the term from last night. Do you remember when I said this is an interesting rephrase, radical caring?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this radical pursuit of deeper care.
Yeah.
And so we do have to hold that alive.
Yeah.
And there will be people that say, "Oh, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment." But these are the people who are afraid to dream because they're afraid of disappointment.
Yeah.
Like depending on what you're hearing back, like,
And
you know,
yeah, it might even be more subtle, like when you're like, "Ah, this is not it. I feel like I'm just going to work and I'm coming home and I'm making lunches and walking the dog and doing it again over and over. And I feel like I'm just in this hamster wheel. And, my job is draining the life out of me. And then people are like, well, nobody likes their jobs. You just have to pay your bills. You have to pay your rent.
yeah.
Nobody likes their jobs. So it doesn't even have to be super like directed at you,
Yeah, I feel
but
like
can it be like, all right, so what would light you up? How can we make money at it? How can we brainstorm together? And I think that there's like a
how can we
big,
create better balance?
yeah. Or, like,
Even if it's an hour to like finger paint outside, like,
yeah, or even, or even looking at the relationships around you and the
ooh,
examples that you have,
yeah.
like that was super challenging. And, people were trying to set me up for years, and I was just like, like,
Well, it's
no.
because you're so yeah.
Well, but like I like felt like they were more invested in it than I was.
I know, but you're charismatic and beautiful and funny and smart.
Um,
And so people look at you probably and they're like,
they're like
what?
sad for me because I was alone,
Yeah.
but I was genuinely, genuinely happy and fine being alone because I didn't want to settle for anything. I
Mm.
didn't want to settle for anything?
I think a lot of the feedback that I received in my life around relationship was that like nothing's perfect,
Yes.
like oh, I'm not happy in this relationship. Well, no one, nothing's perfect.
Nobody is really all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, nobody really is. And so I do think that these are the wet blankets.
hmm
And it's good to talk about it because it sort of keeps you complacent,
Yeah. And where does it come from? Because they're not happy with their job and they feel stuck in it and they're not like
happy with
happy
their
with their
relation.
relationship, but
Yeah.
like they've made a commitment
Yeah.
and so they're just sticking it out. But in the end, that's like not great for everybody.
I do think it gets easier once you start to identify like where it's coming from. But nonetheless, when it's so
Oh yeah, it's
vulnerable and
hard.
young,
It's
you do
so
have to
hard.
divert that energy from managing someone else's projections, someone else's emotional
Yeah.
needs. You cannot spend your energy doing that. You have
Oh
to spend
yeah.
it pouring it into the thing that you're trying to build.
Yeah.
And so this is the wet blanket. And
Yeah.
also, I think this does tie into because we wanted to talk about, not just our overall summary of the artist way, which I think it's important to talk about, but we
hmm
also wanted to talk about our overall experience of starting this podcast.
Yeah.
And so maybe this is a tie into, this idea like, well, maybe we could have a podcast. right? And if we had
Yeah.
told that to somebody and they said, well, who's gonna want to listen to what you guys have to say?
Yeah,
We
exactly.
would not have started a podcast, maybe.
I mean, we hesitated even because we had watched a video on like what you need to start a podcast. And it was
Mm,
like a mic and this and this and this and this editing software and blah, 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 blah. And
yeah,
we didn't have any of that. And we
no,
don't have like all this money to like pour into all of this equipment.
no,
And I just felt like the people who start some things that take off just start.
yeah.
Like, and they
You
don't
just
worry
begin
about
where
it
you
being
are.
perfect. And like sometimes we say the wrong thing, you know, it's maybe even it's just the wrong word. Last episode, I wanted to talk about developed countries and I kept saying developing countries. Are we gonna re-record? I
No,
feel like the people can understand in context what I was talking about. We're
yeah,
recording on Zoom. It is not the best camera. It is not the best sound.
yeah.
It's not the best anything. My internet at home is super unstable. So sometimes
Unstable is such an understatement.
oh, sometimes we're recording, you know, and it just cuts out for like a minute.
Yeah,
And then you're trying to pick up where it left off.
yeah,
Sometimes, you know, like Jack didn't even know that it cut out because she's like fully channeling and like in the moment. And then I have to stop and tell her that it cut out. We just try our best to pick it up
yeah.
and to edit it so that it's smooth. So like if you see jumping around when you're watching it on YouTube, I mean, that's what it is. And sometimes the sound cuts.
But we could have let all of that prevent
A
us from.
100%. Well, we
Mhm.
don't have a mic, so like if we talk at the same time now, it's okay. But when we're in two separate locations, if I even say yeah, then it cuts out what she's saying. So
Yeah,
we
but
could
even
have let it all
aside from
go.
all of that,
Yeah.
yeah, there's just a lot of
There's so
technical
many things. There's
challenges.
so many things and we could have just not done it.
Yeah, and
We
even
yeah.
beneath that, I do think that we could have felt like we didn't have something valuable to offer.
Yeah. And I think we did question that also.
Yeah.
And, you know, we haven't had a lot of comments. Like, please leave a comment. It helps so much. But you know what I mean? Like people physically liking the episode or commenting.
Yeah.
Um, but we've had so many messages come in from people that we didn't in our lives that we didn't even know were listening to the podcast saying,
Yeah.
you know, I listened to episode whatever and it just felt like the
But
warm
this
hug that
is
I needed. And so we do have stuff to share, but when you question it and you don't put it out there,
Yeah, but this is trusting
you
the
can't
darkness.
exactly. It's trusting the darkness, and it's the things that we were talking about also a little bit last week about like trusting and being vulnerable and opening up
Yeah.
so that you can connect. And we're connecting even though we're not like talking on the phone with people or directly texting,
Yeah.
and that feels super
But
important.
just continuing to
Yeah,
create even without the
even if nobody likes it.
even yeah,
Yeah,
or even yeah, even without the flashiness of recognition or having like
yeah,
a viral video or
yeah,
whatever the aspiration is, I do think that every week we try to sink into this place where what we're sharing could help somebody.
yeah.
And in this vein, like having the courage to do the thing. And she talks about like maybe I used to really love tap dancing, or it doesn't even matter
Hmm.
what the thing is,
Yeah,
but like having the courage to do something badly, having the
yeah,
courage to do something when you don't feel all the way ready,
yeah,
having the courage to do it even when you're not getting that feedback, that it's,
yeah,
just trusting your own calling to what lights you up, what lights me up. And
yeah.
sometimes it changes moment to moment, especially
Sure.
as manifesting generators.
Yeah.
It could change every day.
Yeah.
And so from the outside, it might look like very like disorganized and
Hmm.
haphazard and maybe frivolous.
Yeah.
But on the inside, it's the compass.
Yes.
And a lot of people maybe can't see your own internal compass.
Yeah.
So then they turn it into wet blankets. They're like, what the heck are you two doing over there?
Yeah.
We're like, everything, all the time. We're
Yeah.
doing it all.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard though, you know, sometimes. And I think that there's more tests when she was talking about the tests
Mm.
than you even realize,
Oh, for sure.
you know? There's just so many more tests than you even realize.
Yeah, and even if we don't call them tests, like
Yeah.
these are aligning moments.
Yeah, just moments. And I think even if it's like whether it was the Mercury retrograde thing or posting the message on in the Facebook group
Mm.
and that's Jack responded to it. She posted something a few days later and it was right at the top of my feed, I think because we had interacted in that one post. And this is a group, like I said, with 33,000 members. So it's not like you're seeing every post. It's impossible.
Yeah.
And so trusting that and doing it. And I think it's similar to when people say, like there's never the perfect time.
Mm.
There's never a perfect time to make a lifestyle change. There's never a perfect time to get a dog. There's never a perfect time to go camping. There's never a perfect time. There's always going to be something.
Mm.
And whether it's that test, like how badly do you want it? Like is if your heart is calling for a dog, you know, can your life support it right now? And just do it because there's always going to be something. I mean, I got Rafiki and then a week later, I was going to like a weekend of drum workshops.
Mm.
And I was like, Mom, I'm
Deb pulling through.
so in love with this dog and can you watch him when I go away, like 1 week later?
Mm.
And she said yes.
Yeah.
But I could have been like, I can't get him until after this weekend, Like I just feel like with whatever you're doing,
Yeah, I'm
it's
feeling,
like starting on a Monday,
yeah, yeah, right,
Just
exactly.
start. Just start.
And I also feel like there's so many things in the front of my mind right
Yeah,
now
say.
because I do want to talk about, like throughout the whole summer before you and I met, we were doing so much work. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
daily work, journaling, meditating, energy
Oh
clearing.
yeah.
We were doing workshops, some like shamanic journeys, and for me, I know you have a different story, but for me, it was all about collaboration. I had so much shit around collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And so had been doing all of this work and I'm doing it in a vacuum. No
Mm-hmm.
one sees it. No one can say, oh, yeah, you're doing the right work to meet somebody who's going to be significant in your life. I didn't know that in August you were going to message me.
Yeah.
So we do all of this work and we do it in a vacuum. And even if it's not personal growth work, maybe it's sketching, maybe it's gardening, maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's whatever it is, like we're doing the work without seeing what the future looks like. And we have to trust that space.
Yeah. Yeah, and in the summer I was doing all of these workshops also, didn't know anybody else who was doing them, didn't even talk to anybody really
Mm,
about the fact that I was doing it because I didn't,
yeah.
I don't know. I just joined an embodiment group because it came up and it felt right. And I was walking the beach and doing meditations every day and calling it unconditional love in all of my relationships, letting go of everything that does not serve.
Mm,
And I wasn't calling in like an intimate relationship. I was just like, I just unconditional love every day. I
mm,
release what no longer serves. And I had like an entire meditation that I like said over and over and over as I was walking on the beach.
yeah. But we don't
And
know why.
yeah,
We can't know
yeah.
why in the moment.
No, exactly. And on Lionsgate, when I was meditating, I promised my heart, like that's when that came in. I was
Mm,
like, I will listen to you. And it was like this whole thing that just came flooding in.
mm,
And without that being so close to when I messaged you, like I may not have posted, I may not have done that.
yeah.
But I just promised like anything that you call out for, however small, like I will do it.
Yeah.
Because, I'm sorry I hadn't been listening to you for so long,
Yeah, and
you
I
know?
think and I think that this is the part that I wanted to talk about commitment to personal growth
Mm-hmm.
because however we felt about the course of the artist way and whether we felt it was more juicy in the beginning, I think we both sort of feel like it could have been a quarter of
Yeah.
it could have been a quarter of the length of the book.
Mm-hmm.
There was like a lot of filler, it felt like, and there was a lot of repetition, and maybe that was purposeful, but
Yeah.
at any rate, having this mindset around personal growth is so important for me because it's been a commitment that I've held for myself my entire life. And I just think that finding a partner, having a partner who's also committed to personal growth, it changes the game,
Mm-hmm.
because I felt like I was always trying to assert my own intentions around that with my previous partner. And they did not hold those same, like there was not space for personal growth. And so it felt like this disappointment and also micromanaging. There's just a lot of shit that
Yeah.
came along with that. And so it just feels incredibly rewarding to sit down and do something with somebody for 12 weeks.
Yeah.
And the only intention is just for growth, to
Yeah.
know yourself better, to find yourself
Yeah.
easier, to do some shadow work, because I do think that there was some shadow uncovered
Yeah.
in the beginning of this process, to
Mm-hmm.
have that deepening and none of it was for the relationship.
No.
It wasn't like the artist way is a 12-week program to deepen your relationships.
Yeah.
It was for personal growth.
Yeah.
And I just think that it's so important that you align yourself if you're somebody who is committed to personal growth. It's so important, not just in your intimate relationships, in any relationship, to
Hmm.
align yourself with people who have also made that commitment.
Yeah.
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 So overall, what would you say for someone listening if they're thinking about doing the artist way, the 12-week journey?
Yeah. I mean, if you're thinking about doing it, I think with anything, if there's something about it that's like, oh, I should do that, do it.
Yeah.
Just do it, commit, and do it because we managed to, and I think having the podcast really helped because we go back through it and then we'd find the connections.
Yeah.
I think just reading it at the beginning of the week and then going into your week, it was harder to like make those connections, but went back and we're like, oh, like we were also sitting in this many times.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, if we had not done the artist way, we would not have started a
yeah,
podcast.
probably.
That is for sure.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Even though it's a line for both of
And we
us.
had talked about it before.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do not think we would have.
Yeah.
Jen and I sometimes do ask ChatGPT to help us understand our astrological placements.
And it's always like start a podcast.
Yeah, it is because we both have North Nodes in Gemini.
Yeah. Talk to the people.
Yeah, talk to the people. Yeah, so overall, I do think having somebody to do it with was helpful.
Yes,
Um,
I would have 100% would have quit on my own when
mm,
it started losing juice and I started getting tired and other things started taking up space. 100% would have quit.
yeah,
Yeah.
I do think it's important to have a little community around
Yeah.
you. So even if you can con some of your friends into doing it,
Yeah.
or find like I'm sure there's meetups online for people who
Yeah.
are doing these types of things, or you could start one,
Yeah.
like we're still talking about what the details around an artist circle might look like or
Yeah.
what type of circle we're going to facilitate. But and so that was the end of the book, just
Yeah.
honoring the circle. Yeah, I would say overall it felt like it did highlight the Venus retrograde, like
Sure.
feeling the stream flowing and then getting cut off.
Yeah. Yeah, for
It was like
sure.
a definite like go and then stop.
Yeah, I
And
do wish.
now that she's direct, it's like, okay, go.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do wish I had my book so that I could look at the dates because I think that that would have been interesting.
Oh
But
yeah,
yeah, I
for
left it in
sure.
Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I don't regret it.
Me
I don't
neither.
regret it. And
No.
I think it can take maybe less time if you're a bit more focused because the morning pages were supposed to take about 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
They often took an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Even when I was by myself.
Mm,
It's just really easy to get distracted. The dog's now crying, you take him outside and then you get distracted by something else. So
yeah.
yeah, I think if you can really make a better container for yourself, then it will feel like less of a time commitment.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And just in terms of the future of the podcast, we are going to take 1 week off
yeah,
this
yeah,
coming week.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, we're just gonna take a week off and figure out what we're gonna do. I don't know that we are gonna choose another book and kind of do it like a book club,
Yeah,
but
probably not.
yeah, but if stuff comes up, when we're reading, but I think we're just gonna keep dropping in, asking for what most serves, thinking about what's going on in our life and how that can maybe help other people.
Yeah, and we do ask for guidance every week.
Yeah, sure.
And so it does sort of allow us to be a connector, a bridge.
Yeah.
So that feels good. We'll just continue to keep
Yeah.
flowing.
Yeah, and if you guys are sitting in anything, I mean, leave a comment because if we're sitting in anything similar, then maybe we'll talk about it?
Yeah.
So that also helps as a way to keep us connected.
Okay, so we'll not be back with a new episode next week, but the week after we'll be back and we'll
Yeah.
have a different format because we will no longer be covering the artist way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I hope that you've enjoyed sort of the summary of the artist way and our
Yeah.
experience. And overall, I feel like chapter 12 it's almost as if we could have read chapter 12 and just read chapter 12 of the artist way
Yeah.
because
Maybe.
it did feel like a good summary of all the concepts
Yeah.
that we had talked about today.
Yeah, you could get it from the library and flip through it maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it calls you, do it. I mean, if something's calling you, it's calling you for a reason, even if it's just to see if you can like stick with it for 12 weeks.
Yeah. And I also think that we do not always know what's underneath, right? Because we haven't seen those deeper parts of self.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I still haven't accessed what's at the bottom of the well.
Yeah.
You know, I did get the bucket out. I did like hook it up and like drop it
Yeah.
down in there, and I have pulled some water out, but there's
Yeah.
no way that I've gotten into the depths of the well of my own creative process,
Yeah.
even after 12 dedicated weeks.
Hmm.
And so I do think it's going to be interesting to see how we continue to have that momentum and dedication around deepening the creative process outside of the artist way.
Yeah.
But I do look forward to exploring that with you.
Yeah, it's so fun.
Mm.
And there's many things that we've started that feel like it's time to start working on them again. So,
Yeah, I agree.
and new things,
Yeah, new
always new things.
things.
Yeah, we'll share everything that we can when we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for listening this
Yeah.
week.
Oh, thank you so much for being here as
Coming
always.
with us on location with
Mm.
our sunburned noses.
Yeah, it's cold, but it's sunny.
Hoping that something in this message served.
Yeah.
And we'll talk to you guys soon.
Yeah, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.